Okay, everyone, welcome to our virtual user group, Mastering the Lead Source Between Account Engagement, Pardot and Salesforce. And super excited to have Ollie here to talk to us. Ollie's flying solo today. Piranha's got some exciting news. Hopefully we'll get photos on social media later. But Ollie, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and MarCloud Consulting, and you can dive in.
Yeah, great. I will do. So my name's Ollie. I've been at MarCloud for the last just over 6 months or so. Before that, I was working in B2B marketing for a number of years, and that's sort of where I got started with Pardot, and I used it extensively within one organization. I was like, hey, I love this so much. I want to do it. I want to do it full time. I want to, experience different orgs, different systems, etc. So that's why I joined MarCloud. And yeah, as you can see in the presentation, we got this Star Wars theme going. So you'll see a lot of references on that going forward. So yeah, the topic for today is mastering lead source between account engagement and Salesforce. So yeah, unfortunately, Triana's not gonna be able to introduce that herself, but I'm sure you all know who she is. And I'll just explain a little bit about MarCloud Consulting as well. So we're based in the UK, and we sort of take care of all of your marketing needs for Salesforce, but within the UK. So what are we going to talk about today? We're first going to talk about the importance of tracking consistent lead source values. Then we're going to talk about how account engagement populates source and how Salesforce populates lead source. We're going to talk about why the out-of-the-box setup between account engagement source and Salesforce lead source isn't great. And then we're going to share an approach that we've used with clients to achieve source harmony between all of the platforms. So the importance of lead source tracking. Why do we want to bother with lead source in the first place? Well, one of the biggest questions that a marketer faces regularly is, where did that lead come from? So being confident in having an answer ready allows marketers to demonstrate which initiatives are working or not working, for that matter. There are a few ways to track source between account engagement and Salesforce. One way is lead source, one way is campaigns, and one way is UTMs. But just for this presentation, we're going to discuss the lead source. So why should you make an effort with lead source? Well, first, it looks at the first touch point about what brought in the lead. As a default field, it's mapped through to the contact and account objects. It's used in Sales Cloud reporting and in B2B MA as well. Oops, sorry, I think I missed something there. No, all good. Right, let's talk about how account engagement populates source, how it tracks the source. So in account engagement, source is a text field, and it can either be automatically or manually populated. So auto population can happen through a number of ways. A prospect has to first convert, then account engagement will check if there is a UTM source value in the URL. If there is, then this will be used. If not, then account engagement will check if it can recognize the referring URL. For example, if a person came from LinkedIn, then the source field will be populated with LinkedIn. If not, and you're using something like Google Ads, then there are a few value options there. And if none of the above are present, then the field just remains blank. And manual population happens one of two ways. Either a prospect is imported with a value set for source, or when a prospect record is manually edited. And I've got some handy resources there for if you get the slides when they get sent out. Now, how does Salesforce populate their lead source field? Well, in Salesforce, it's a bit different to account engagement because it's a pick list field that comes with certain values out of the box. There isn't any auto population in the way that account engagement does it. And in Salesforce, a value will only populate when either a lead or contact is imported with a value set for lead source, or when a lead or contact record is manually edited. And it's important to note as well, I'm sure all of you know, that account engagement source and Salesforce lead source can, of course, populate each other's values as well. A quick example here would be if an account engagement record has a value for source and it syncs with Salesforce, then the Salesforce lead source field can adopt this field and vice versa. So it can go both ways, really. They can sync across to each other. So why isn't the out-of-the-box setup that great? Well, in Salesforce, the lead source can be set as a restricted pick list, and this causes sync errors. If the lead source pick list, the lead source pick list isn't restricted, which means any value can appear in the field despite it not being on the pick list. And on the account engagement side, the source is a text field, meaning there's no sort of governance on the values being used, meaning that there's a lot of misalignment with what's going on in Salesforce. So what are we going to do? Well, what we're not going to do is freak out like Anakin did and just go crazy like this. We're going to calm down. We're going to take a deep breath. And we're going to learn to master lead source tracking. So there's a number of things you need to do in both Salesforce and account engagement. We're going to start with what to do in Salesforce. First, you need to agree internally on more refined field values for both Salesforce and account engagement. So what you can do for this is you can create 2 reports in Salesforce, one for leads, one for contacts, and you can sort them by the lead source values. And then you can grab those values and put them in a spreadsheet like you can see on the right-hand side on the image. And you can do the same for account engagement, actually. You can just export all of your prospects. You can take the values from that source field, all of the unique values, and put them on a spreadsheet. Then you want to map them to more kind of consistent consolidated values. So as an example here, like you can see in the image, there are values like PR and press release. And there's really no reason why they can't just be mapped to a single value, public relations. It makes it so much easier to see in reports, and it's just a lot cleaner. And we all like values that are clean data. Now, there may be some values that you require more than just a high-level view. So for this, what you can do is add a new column called detailed lead source, and this will represent a new field. So as an example of this, when you're using things like social media for your marketing, you want to see exactly which social media platforms prospects came from, and not just that they came from social media. So you can add those values on the side. As you can see on the example, we've got LinkedIn and we've got Facebook there. Then what we want to do, just as best practice on the off chance something goes wrong on the next stage, you want to export all of your lead and contact data from Salesforce, as in the next stage, you're going to be swapping the field values. So again, just in case something goes wrong, you don't want to have no record of that data. Then you want to update your lead source pick list values in Salesforce on the lead and contact objects. And what you can do is use the replace tool to replace your old values with the new consolidated values that you just aligned in the spreadsheet that you would have done in the previous stage. And that's it really for Salesforce. In terms of account engagement, you want to export all prospect data. And just a quick note, you want to do this before making any Salesforce changes in the previous steps. Then create 2 new fields in account engagement, one called Salesforce lead source field, and this can be a pick list, and one called detailed lead source field, which is a text. And again, this is just sort of optional if you want to see those more detailed values like social media. Then unmap your source field and Salesforce lead source field, and align the new Salesforce lead source field to lead source. Sorry, there's just so many sources and forces. It's confusing me even. Then you want to run a new export to check for any rogue values and correct as needed. And import that data back into Pardot just to ensure that the new values map to the new Salesforce lead source field. Now, maintaining values going forward. So now that you've done sort of like the heavy lifting in terms of getting everything right, you want to make sure that going forward, there's an automated system in place to keep that going. So we're going to use Engagement Studio for that. So we want to create an Engagement Studio that updates the Salesforce lead source field, which is that new lead source field that we created in Pardot, the custom field. And if you're using UTM medium and source, then you can include these as well. So I don't know if you can see, but on the image, the middle, the image just on the right-hand side of the text, is basically listing out all of the values that could be in that source field. And then there's an action to change it, the new Salesforce lead source field, to the agreed upon consolidated values. And then after that, you can also use the new detailed lead source field, and you can have that as well as an action afterwards. Then you can turn on the engagement studio and watch the magic happen. So just a quick recap of what we've discussed. The importance of capturing accurate and consistent lead source data. Then we discussed the modifications needed to help Pardot and Salesforce do this. And obviously follow our step-by-step approach to achieve this. And some top tips going forward: you need to monitor how well your lead source fields are populating and adjust as needed over time. So what I mean by that is, if I go back into the engagement studio, once in a while, you may have some rogue values come through Pardot on that source field that you haven't yet accounted for on the engagement studio. And you just want to keep an eye for new prospects that come through that engagement studio and aren't matching any of the things you've already taken account for. And if they don't match, you want to make sure that maybe they're added to a list or they're given a tag, just so you can immediately identify those prospects, and then you can adjust your engagement studio as needed to include those rogue values. And you need to internally educate how well your lead source, in all teams who are going to be using the lead source field to use correct values, especially anyone who imports records, because there's no use in doing all of this work just to have someone internally not understand the new system and then cause some problems there. So yeah, that is everything. You are now the master of lead source. May the source be with you. Sorry, that sounded horrible there at the end. But yeah, that's the presentation there. Any questions?
I love may the source be with you. I think that is the perfect way to end that. So question, Joanna in chat, what triggers the engagement studio to run? So could you talk about, engagement studio always has a recipient list. So what do you put in your recipient list to make them flow down the engagement studio?
Yeah, so what I do for that, I just put every single prospect that's in Pardot go through that engagement studio. So I usually just create a dynamic list just to say something like, if their email field is not empty, just something that will identify every single prospect. And then that way it just makes sure everyone's going through the system, and it all goes through, and new prospects will go through immediately as well.
So Crystal says, so is it not best practice to simply update the account engagement data type to a drop-down field and let Salesforce pick list fields sync over? So I think we're asking the Pardot default field for source. It's by default mapped to the Salesforce lead source form. And I highly recommend what Ollie just outlined. I highly recommend unmapping it, because frequently in Salesforce, you have validation rules. And by that, I mean, like, Salesforce only accepts a specific word like advertising. And we might put in, for example, Google Ads. And when you push a lead, a net new lead into Salesforce, or you push an existing record with an updated source field into Salesforce, it may create a validation rule error and prevent that lead from syncing. So that's part of why you want to remap that, Crystal. And then this is like allowing us to grab all those extra fields and feed it into the correct format in the Salesforce version of the field, so that your data is consistent and it makes your reporting super easy down the road. Anything to add to that, Ollie?
No, you did that. Yeah, you answered that amazingly. Thank you.
Awesome. So I use a variation of this for other like data cleaning. So the Engagement Studio program you showed with the complex rule logic, and you mentioned having it apply a tag or something like that, add them to a list when they don't meet the criteria.
Yes.
So what I love about this sort of, I'm pointing at my screen. What I love about this sort of rule is you can make a series of logic steps. So everybody joins the recipient list at the top, and they flow through these yellow complex rules. Do they meet, does the source field say social media? Does it say Twitter? Does it say LinkedIn? And the yellow steps create a branching path, a yes and a no path. So on the yes path, you put your blue step that says change the prospect field value to social media or advertising or whatever. My preference here is to let them end. So you put a red end step under that blue change prospect field step, and they end. And then people just continue down the no step. When their field doesn't say something with social media, they go down to the next complex rule, and it looks for, does it say PPC? Does it say paid ads? Does it say paid? Does it say CPC? And if yes, then they change to the next value. And so you can keep them going down this left-hand no path. I call it the ultimate no path. And then at the end of that, I like to put a notify Laura step so that I get an email for those people who are missing. And hopefully I only get one, and then I can go back and edit my program and make changes to the future.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, the way that I'm doing it at the moment is adding them to a list, I think. But yeah, you can do it any way that works for you.
Yeah. So Stacy, we're gonna post the recording of this tomorrow, and Ollie's gonna send slides over. I don't think there's a larger blog post about this, but if I'm wrong, Ollie will let me know, and we'll send it out. And just by attending, you'll be on the list to get by registering for this event, you'll be on the list to get that update when it goes out.
Yeah.
Couple more questions. Is anyone using field history tracking on the lead source field, or is using the lead source most recent better to use? So that's kind of a deep question, I think. Do you have thoughts on that, Ollie, or I can throw it to someone?
No, if anyone else has thoughts on that.
So I will say that most often I see companies have lead source only accept the one value at a time. And what we'll have is like a Salesforce flow that detects, the person has an update. Sorry, we'll have a paired of lead source fields. We'll have original lead source, and then we'll have most recent lead source. And so there'll be a flow that says, is original lead source empty? If yes, pull the value from most recent lead source into original. And then the most recent lead source will frequently overwrite multiple times. So, it's capturing their first touch ever into the original lead source field. And then most recent lead source is allowed to overwrite multiple times. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. It can get hairy, and you need to think through the logic and definitely deploy it in a sandbox before you deploy it to production. If anyone else wants to chime in, we've got a lot of Pardot experts and Salesforce experts in here. Okay, so looks like Agatha had a question about choosing or versus and in the complex rule, and Kate answered that in chat. So using or, basically, you're very unlikely to have anyone where the source is social media and Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook. So we want that to be any of those variations, and that's the or rule there. If the source field says social media or contains Twitter in some permeation, like Twitter dash, or contains LinkedIn dash or something like that, we want all of those possibilities to be met. And then Edward said, raised a hand. Did you have a question and want to come off mute? I'll let you chime in if you can. And yeah, seems like that's most of the questions right now. All right, Edward's mic's not working. If you want to type your question in, that's cool. We'll get to you. So I feel like we'll just wait a couple seconds for Edward to get his question in. If anyone wants to come off of mute and ask a question, that's perfectly fine. This is definitely very free form. We're definitely in the Q&A session. Let's see, longer question from Jeffrey. Custom. Sorry, Jeffrey, I don't know what the LU field is standing for. It says, for my clients, we have a custom LU field to a campaign on our leads. Lookup field? Okay, lookup field. Thank you so much. Campaign, a lookup dependent value under lead source field. I think this question, sorry, it's kind of lengthy and I'm not reading it out loud. I think this question is a little too in-depth for me to be able to answer it on this format. I think I would need like some back and forth questions to really understand it. But basically, I think it's similar to what I was saying. So Jeffrey's saying that he has a lookup field that's like freezing the values at a certain time. And force the lead or activity is the source of opportunity creation. Yeah, this gets into like a lot of different custom objects and flows. So I think we'd have to take that offline to really dig into it. But the questions about weaknesses or considerations to modify or enhance it, it's kind of a loaded question and it's going to be different for every company. So I don't have an answer off the top of my head, but it seems like a good one. I'll say that. Seems like a good deep question. So here we go from Edward. Our sales team uses the lead source field a lot and was wondering what recommendations you have for both marketing and sales using this field. We also use this field in a form, so people are using recall to say how they heard about our org, but they might have forgotten. What do you think, Ollie?
Okay, yeah. Sales needs to use the sales field a lot. Yeah, so I think with that it's all about just internal education, just getting sales and marketing together and making sure that they're aligned. In terms of using that field in a form, I don't immediately see any problems with that.
Yeah.
But I guess there might be some scenarios where you might not want some of the values to show in the form. So I think that could be a consideration there. What do you think, Laura?
I think I would create a different field for the form. So, how are people hearing about you is a good question to ask on a form as long as it's an optional field. But I think you might get some different values in that field on a form than you necessarily want in Salesforce. So you might do a data mapping process of this sort where, you show them different values on the form. You certainly wouldn't show them the things that's like, oh, my sales manager recommended you or something like that. I don't see any particular problem with sales and marketing using the same field. A lot of times there is overlap. You should have an option for like, oh, sales source this versus marketing source this. But I think that's where it gets into the having multiple field values. So, is the lead source social media? And then the next one, the next field, the dependent field is like which type of social media. I think that gets into those sorts of questions. I do, like my current company, I do have a bunch of marketing fields for like social media, paid advertising, events. And then I have a couple that are specific to the sales manager bringing something. So it's like, this is from the sales manager's network or a LinkedIn activity or something like that. So you can see some of them are shared, but if you make some dependent fields, you can like really get down into the nitty gritty details. I don't think there's a real problem with both sales and marketing using it, but you might evaluate not putting it on your form, or if you're asking the right questions or that kind of thing.
And then there's considerations about whether or not you have a different source. You end up having a different account engagement source value. So which one would you use then? Because if they did, and which one's correct. So it's just making sure that that's considered as well, I guess.
Yeah, and a little bit there are considerations for like what is required in Salesforce. Like I've worked for some companies where lead source is always required, and currently it's not required. And I'm making noises about making lead source required, but it's also sort of a chicken and the egg. Like, will people manually put in leads if they have to fill in like 1,000 fields? No. Will it cause sync problems if lead source field is blank and there's a validation rule that lead source must be filled in? Yes. So if you're uploading things, so it's really about evaluating what's going on. And it is hard to properly create those flows and things that will say what was their first ever campaign they were added to. And also, are you adding people to a campaign when they're created, or do you have leads that were created in 2018 and the first time they're added to a campaign is like 2023? It's a little gray. There's no right or wrong, I think is what it comes down to. I don't know that I answered the question, but it's different for every company too. So, all right. Crystal. All right, Crystal, I'm going to recap your presentation to ensure I understand the takeaway. Add 2 custom fields, detailed lead source and Salesforce lead source to track values more granularly. Build an engagement studio program to update that custom field for Salesforce lead source and our detailed lead source. Unmap the default source field in MCAE, aka Pardot. Pretty much, I think that's pretty much it. I think the 2 custom fields you're going to create are both in Salesforce and in Pardot, and you're going to map them together. And along the way, you're going to unmap that default source field in Pardot. Yeah, I think you'll find that that's a big change and gives you cleaner data all the way through. And then because you might have different places you're gathering source. So the Pardot default field for source will still be gathering data because that's what it does. You also might have some custom fields for UTM parameters that you're collecting. If that's the case, you'll have more difficult, quote unquote, difficult thoughts to consider. But you're in the right vein of thought, Crystal. Yeah, the whole thing is like, how much can you automate to take all of those fields and push it into your new fields for default lead source? It'll be great. You'll love it when it's done. Justin, once use a different source field for each stage of the funnel. For example, what was the source of the prospect source for the MQL? That way we could track. Oh, I like that, Justin. That's very interesting to see like what was their most recent source at the time they changed stages. That's very interesting. I really like that. I'd never thought of that.
I'm interested in how you would go about setting that up. Actually, maybe that can be the topic of the next one.
Yeah, Justin, that'd be pretty cool if you want to talk about. That's more, if you're able to come off of mute, we'd be happy to hear you talk about it. I'm imagining it's like source is able to overwrite, and then when MQL gets marked, there's a flow that's moving, like what was their source at that moment in time into a custom field. Something like that. That's pretty cool. I like that a lot. Jocelyn, I don't think I understand your question. Are you using an append rule to capture multi-touch attribution? I don't think I understand the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
So I'll say multi-touch attribution is better done append versus overwrite in the example above. I think it's different topics. I'll say multi-touch attribution is more about the campaign membership than it is lead source field. So Pardot, being Pardot customers, account engagement customers, still Pardot to me. They give you a custom object in Salesforce called customizable campaign influence. And what that does is when a prospect, a lead, or a contact does something in Pardot, you can create automation rules, or you can create completion actions on forms that say add person to Salesforce campaign XYZ. And they get added into the Salesforce campaign, and they can be in many, many, many campaigns. But a lead source field, it's only one value at a time. And when it comes to attribution, you have then an opportunity is created, and the person, the contact, is named on the opportunity in the contact role object, contact role record, and the campaign influence creates a junction between the campaign membership and them being named on an opportunity. And that's where you get the reports tying in. So I think multi-touch attribution is better done via campaigns rather than source. So you get all the interesting questions, Ollie. But I think source, this is like an exciting presentation to me because source is something that as marketers, we all dive into and kind of debate. And I think this concept that I'm hearing is kind of multifaceted, right? Like the stuff that Pardot pushes in or that we get from our UTM parameters needs cleaning because maybe we weren't consistent or maybe we've changed leadership and they prefer UTM parameters to indicate something else. You know, I've had paid ads, I'd have ads, I've had CPC, I've had Google ads. They all kind of mean the same thing. So this data cleaning to move it into the correct pick list value of lead source, and then to further change, you know, is it a secondary field of not just social media, but what type of social media, or not just paid advertising, but where was the paid advertising? All of that is key and gets you cleaner data. And then I think some interesting insights about like what were their original ever lead source versus what is their most recent lead source. And then taking it further to grab Justin's concept of like, what was their lead source at the moment they changed from just a lead to an MQL or from the MQL to an SQL. That's really intriguing. And I think it's pretty exciting talking about this and what can we as marketers do. Some of it involves Salesforce work, but a lot of it really is right in Pardot for us. So that's pretty cool.
Is this something, just out of interest, is this something in your experience that a lot of people are making an effort to do, or is it just kind of not really?
It's definitely, I only spent 2 years as a consultant, and then I find I prefer being in-house and embedded like deep in a marketing team. It's definitely something everyone struggles with though as lead source. Like, what do we capture? When is it relevant? How long is it relevant? Do we only ever capture the first one? Do we allow it to overwrite? And there's no one single right answer, but there's a lot of options out there that every company has to weigh. And sometimes I flat out tell my senior leadership, like, we're not ready for that yet, but I'm glad you're asking the question. Megan, so kind of you. I worked with Megan and she said I was a great consultant for her. But part of it comes back to having great clients too, I will say that. So Ollie, you're new as a consultant, right? How long have you been in the consulting game?
Just over 6 months, actually. Yeah, I've just learned so much. Like every week, I just constantly get my mind blown with something new. Because I think when you first land in it, there's always, you think it's more simple than it actually is in a way. Just because you're like, oh, yeah, you know, I know this, but actually, you can get so in depth with just the simplest of things, and yeah.
Yeah. I think we're also seeing like a big change in things, like, you know, just in the last couple of years, this campaign influence concept and marketing influence and marketing attribution, like that didn't exist so long ago. So we're seeing lots of changes. And I think lead source has a lot to do with it. You know, like we are understanding that their first touch source, lead source, isn't the be all end all. So yeah, so I'm excited to see, you know, this is a great presentation, Ollie. You addressed so many things that I struggled with, and you had great illustrations. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope all of the Star Wars stuff wasn't too cringy for you.
No, I loved it. Kudos to you or Triana or whoever came up with that. That was super fun.
Yeah, it was Triana. Yeah. Yeah, I hope I was all good though, because I wasn't prepared to do everything myself. But yeah, you
did great.
Thank you for that.
So congrats on that. I think we're going to wrap unless we have last minute questions. I'll give people a couple more seconds to ask questions, but I think we're going to wrap and everyone can get back to their lunches. well, lunch our time. It's dinner time, your time, Ollie. But we're excited. Hopefully we'll do some more of these. And I am going to stop recording. Thank you, everyone. And